Okay, so this is a 2009 Mazda CX-7. It's got a 2.3 liter turbocharged engine. Now, if you've been watching my videos, you probably know that this car just had a timing chain and a turbocharger put in. Now, ever since then, it's been running fine, but we keep getting a persistent p2006 code. Now, that's for manifold runner control stuck closed. So, on these vehicles, like many vehicles these days, they actually have butterflies in the intake manifold which open and close based on the throttle position in order to give you more torque. So the problem is that it seems to be the computer doesn't know what it's doing. So if we come down here, now I've already removed this plate here. It normally goes in there. I've removed that, moved all the wires out of the way. So this little tan piece, this is your vacuum actuator. So this is your vacuum actuator right here, which actually opens and closes the butterflies. And you can see it runs down to a little linkage down here. If I can get my hand in there, I'll show you how it opens. It's a tight squeeze, but it pulls down on that lever and turns that shaft. Now this little piece right here is actually a switch. There's not a lot of space in here, but it's a switch with a little plunger on the end to detect when the butterflies are in a certain position. Now there's supposed to be a little plastic piece, and you can see the remains of it, that pushes down on this plunger. Well, that wasn't in exactly the right position when I put it back together, and that's why it wasn't working correctly. But when I went to adjust it, that plastic piece just broke off, and now there's nothing to push on the switch, so we keep getting the code. Now, of course, you know, being the way things are these days, Mazda isn't going to sell me that little plastic piece, and even if they would, I'd have to take the whole shaft out of the intake manifold to replace it and get to it, and that's just not reasonable. So instead, what I'm going to do is I've got this little L-shaped piece of metal. I'm going to put it down here. Hopefully, you'll be able to see this. I'm going to move my hand in a minute. Okay, so it's really hard to see, but basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this little L-shaped piece of metal and I'm going to weld it to this metal bracket on here that the vacuum actuator connects to. And this is going to be our new piece that will depress the plunger on that switch. That way it will know when the butterflies are in the correct position, and it will stop giving us that code. So there's our cab welded on. It's not the prettiest, but it's solid, so it should work. And you notice it's depressing the plunger now. If I retract the vacuum actuator, of course my hand's getting in the way again, but you see if we pull down on the vacuum actuator, it releases the plunger, release the vacuum actuator, and it compresses the plunger again. So that should solve our problem. Now if you choose to go this route, you definitely want to be very, very careful, because back behind this welding blanket is the high pressure fuel pump and a number of fuel lines, so you don't want any stray sparks hitting those. And you want to make sure you ground it so that it's going to get a direct path to that plate. Now I would have gone right to the plate itself, but there's not enough space, so I went to the intake manifold, which is the next best thing. The other thing, of course, the battery is disconnected for all of this. And the other thing you want to keep in mind is you do not want to try to put a whole bunch of weld on there at once, because it can heat that up too much. Notice the vacuum actuator rod. See if you can get to see this better. The actuator rod from the vacuum actuator is actually plastic. So, and we don't want to risk heating up and damaging any seals inside the intake manifold where the shaft enters. So I just went really slow and did a little bit at a time so that it wouldn't heat up too much. But yeah, that should be it. I'm going to throw some clear coat on this just so it doesn't rust. We'll put all this stuff back together, take it for a test drive, and see if it solves the problem. So it's all back together now. Now I welded this one, but if you don't have a welder or you're not comfortable with welding on it, you can always use some metal epoxy, or I like this stuff. This is called steel stick. I found this stuff works really well. You can just knead it around there, and it should be plenty strong enough for this application. You really don't need it to be that strong because they had plastic there before, and you know, metal's going to be stronger than plastic. I don't know why Mazda decided to put plastic there. I can't really think of any good reason, because it's tucked way down in there, right in an area where it's going to get heat soaked like crazy, and so of course it's going to become brittle. And this is actually not that uncommon. A number of people have had those things break while doing engine work. So yeah, but what we're going to do now is, I'm not doing it right now, but in a little while I'm going to clear the codes on this car, and we'll take it for a drive and make sure it's not setting that code anymore. Okay, so I took it for a short drive. I've got the computer hooked up here because although this code sets pretty quickly, it doesn't immediately set a check engine light. So it'll take a little bit of time for it to set a check engine light. So instead, we got the computer scanning for codes here. Hit the refresh button, and you can see we have no codes, and down here at the bottom, distance traveled since DTC's cleared, 7.46 miles, which is more than enough time for this code to set. This code usually sets almost immediately if it's having that issue. So we're not getting the code anymore, so that means the problem is fixed. So hopefully this helped you out. If you got any questions, comments, or concerns, leave them down below.